Hi there, I'm Mrs F, and this is my video on the reasons for the growth and support of the Nazi Party. Although I'm following the Edexcel specification, you'll find that a lot of the content is also relevant to other exam boards. This is the second of my lessons on the reasons for the growth in Nazi support. Last lesson, I looked at the economic and political crisis that took place between 1929 and 1932. This lesson, I'm going to look at why the Nazi Party were particularly well placed to take advantage of this crisis by looking at the things that the Nazi Party themselves did through the appeal of Hitler, propaganda, and the work of the SA. Now, in a previous lesson that I did on the early development of the Nazi Party, we looked at why Hitler became such a popular leader. In particular, we focused on how he carefully rehearsed his speeches and how he practiced his hand gestures to win fame as an orator or public speaker. And Hitler featured very prominently in Nazi posters and spoke in many parts of the country as possible. And you can see one of the very famous election posters of 1932 on the screen there. Now, Hitler was seen as a strong leader who would restore law and order and scrap the hated Treaty of Versailles. So he won support from wealthy businessmen. And this provided them with vital funding for the costs of running a modern election campaign. For example, the posters that we've seen, having radio broadcasts, which you actually see at the bottom there, that's a radio transmitter that he's speaking into. And Hitler also used aeroplanes for his whirlwind campaigns of the 1930 and 1932 elections. One of the really ironic things you have to get your head around with the SA is that they were a group of thugs and actually caused a lot of violence on the streets. But Hitler sold them as a force that would actually stop the violence. And he did this by getting the uniformed SA to have these marches through the streets. And as you can see from that picture at the bottom of the screen, they did look very organised and disciplined. And this was very appealing in a time of economic and social turmoil. As I was explaining last lesson, with this rise in homelessness and unemployment, there had been quite a lot of fighting and violence on the streets. And so Hitler kind of presented the SA as a force who could help deal with this. Now, the other way that the SA helped the Nazis come to power is by being used to disrupt opposition parties. The Nazis had a much stronger private army than the communists. By 1930, the SA had 400,000 stormtroopers, whereas the KPD Red Front fighters only numbered about 130,000. And during the elections of 1930 and 1932, armed and uniformed SA tore down opposition posters, intimidated the election candidates, broke into their offices and disrupted their rallies. In 1932, in a clash with communists near Hamburg, 18 people were killed. A man that we'll learn a lot more about in a future lesson is Joseph Goebbels. He was the district leader of Berlin and the director of propaganda for the Nazi Party, and he really was a mastermind of propaganda. He was very skillful in targeting specific groups of voters with a range of different posters and leaflets. Now, the Nazis had particular policies that appealed to particular sections of German society. So the Nazis chose speakers and topics of discussion that would be suited to each specific audience. But at the same time as dividing out the population into groups they could target, the Nazis also used their strong nationalist ideology to create a sense of unity against a common enemy, which they portrayed to be the Jews and communists. The leaders of big businesses were one group targeted by the Nazi Party. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a poster that was targeting big businesses. Now, wealthy industrialists usually supported the National Party, which wasn't quite as right-wing as the Nazis. But because the National Party and other moderate parties had been powerless to solve the economic crisis, Hitler persuaded them that the Nazi Party was their best hope of protection from the communists. Now, this really benefited Nazi finances because wealthy businessmen like Benz and Krupps poured money into the Nazi Party. And this targeting of big business was really good for propaganda too. The National Party leader, Alfred Hugenberg, was a newspaper tycoon, a bit like a kind of Rupert Murdoch. And he allowed Goebbels to use his newspapers for Nazi propaganda against the communists. The Nazi Party also tried to present themselves as the party of the workers, and we can actually see it in their name itself, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. In order to attract working class voters, the Nazis promised people work and bread on posters like the one you can see on the screen there. But the working classes weren't stupid. They could see how Hitler was trying to court the big business owners, and they actually were much more likely to vote communist. So workers were actually underrepresented in the membership of the Nazi Party. Far more important in the growth of the Nazi Party was support from the middle classes, which contained professional people like teachers and lawyers, business people, and small farmers. Interestingly, white-collar workers, artisans, merchants, shopkeepers, and civil servants were twice as strongly represented in the Nazi Party than in society as a whole. They began to desert the moderate parties for three main reasons. First of all, during the Great Depression, many had lost their companies, their savings, or their pensions, on top of the fact that they'd lost their savings during hyperinflation as well. So they saw Hitler as a strong leader who could help the country recover. After 1929, they became particularly concerned about the growth of the Communist Party, as I explained in my previous lesson. The Communists wanted to abolish private ownership of land and business, and the middle classes saw the Nazis as a strong party that could help protect them against this, which is what you see in the propaganda poster on the right, showing some bandaged SA members who'd gone round to beat up the communists. Finally, many middle-class people believed that there had been a moral decline under the Weimar Republic, as we saw in the lesson that I did on German society with the emergence of the new woman. They didn't like the increase in drinking and sexual openness, and saw the Nazis as a return to traditional German values. The Nazis also targeted support from farmers. In 1928, the Nazi policy of confiscating all private land from their 25-point programme was changed. So the new policy said that private land would only be confiscated if it was owned by Jews, and this provided a lot of reassurance to farmers. They hoped that Hitler would protect them from the Communist Party, which had already stated its commitment to confiscating their land. So farmers became another strong section of support for the Nazi Party. In the 1930 Reichstag elections, the Nazis gained 60% of the vote in some rural areas. The Nazis also targeted support from young Germans. For many young people, the Nazi Party was very exciting. Its rallies were colourful and full of atmosphere. Every year they would hold a rally in Nuremberg, like the one you can see on the screen there. And Hitler's speeches were stirring, promising a lot more than the traditional parties. As a result, Hitler attracted many younger people to become members. No fewer than 43% of new members entering the party were aged between 18 and 30. Now, to begin with, many women didn't support the Nazis. The Nazi Party argued that women should play a traditional role in society as wives and mothers. And if you were one of those new women that we've looked at in a previous lesson, this is not going to be at all attractive. But actually, there were a lot of women who were unhappy about the changes in Weimar society. And Nazi propaganda made special appeals to women that said that voting for them would be the best thing for their country and for their families. And a lot of women actually found that quite attractive, and more women came to vote for the Nazis. So, I've now finished looking at the growth in support of the Nazis between 1929 and 1932. In my next lesson, we're going to have a look at how Hitler became Chancellor. So hopefully I'll catch you next week for my next video. Goodbye.